St. Louis loves its historic role as the gateway to the West, which means if you're looking west, your back is to the Mississippi River. Well, our guests today, I think, take a different perspective. Colin Wellenkamp is Executive Director of the Mississippi, I knew I was going to mess this up, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, MRCTI, and which is made up of the mayors of cities and towns up and down the Mississippi River. Also joining us is Jennifer Wendt, whose focus is primarily on environmental issues, clean water, plastics, those sorts of things. Lots to talk about. It's a big river with a lot of different elements that you have to deal with. But right now, all I'm reading about is salt water in the Gulf of Mexico moving into the Mississippi River. That's kind of a big deal, and it's something you're keeping an eye on, right?
Keeping an eye on and intervening on as well. The drought that we have been experiencing on the Mississippi River back and forth, up and down since last fall. So for a year now, including the St. Louis region, all the way up to the headwaters and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, it's one big long drought, is having a more adverse acute effect on our southern Louisiana cities right now as salt water moves up from the Gulf through the channel of the Mississippi to the freshwater intake valves of New Orleans, Gretna, Westwego, and Harahan, Louisiana. Those are four cities that are all clustered together right near the mouth of the Mississippi, and they do not have the ability to treat salt water for their drinking water systems. So they haven't had to deal with this before in history. And we are monitoring, of course, when I say we, I mean local governments, state and federal agencies are all monitoring together this saltwater wedge that is moving closer and closer to those cities and is due to impact their freshwater intake by the end of October.
And the low level of the Mississippi River, it's affecting things up here as well. I mean, we depend a lot on barge traffic, right?
Right.
So if the water gets low, barge traffic is limited.
Barge traffic is limited. The whole global commodity supply chain of the planet becomes impacted, and everyday Americans feel that at the grocery store. They feel it in Starbucks. They feel it in restaurants. They feel it in cafes. The Mississippi River Basin produces 40% of the world's food supply. It produces 90% of U.S. grain output. 40% of all agricultural output of the entire United States moves on the Mississippi River. So unfortunately, when we have long periods of drought and we have to limit what we move, especially during harvest time right now, it really can impact our wallets across the country, across the world. And that's where the drought hits home. It cost us $20 billion in actual losses to this country last year.
So this is something that fascinates me about this organization. And Jennifer, you probably deal with this because you're dealing with environmental issues, right?
Yes.
So whether you're a big city or you're a small town, you've got environmental issues. Maybe they change from place to place or whatever. But how do you get, that's a local issue for me, right? And it's a local issue for Kimmswick or for Vicksburg or for Quad Cities. What's the advantage of bringing the mayors together to talk about what is basically for each of them a local problem?
I think the biggest benefit is the partnerships and the collaboration, because so many of these cities, like Kimmswick you mentioned, has 200 people, I believe.
164.
164 would not be able to get attention needed for that city on the river. But once they all speak together in one common voice, that's how change happens. Because then we come together as a whole organization, all 104 mayors, whether they're bipartisan, diverse groups of people, but all focused on the same thing, and everybody needs to protect that river.
Now, you brought up something, and Colin, you deal with this as well, but when we talk, we know we have deep political divisions in this country, and you guys, this organization goes through blue and red and purple states and small towns and all of that. When you're dealing with environmental issues, especially things like climate change, do those political differences interfere in the ability to get things done, or do people kind of set those aside when we all sit down together as mayors?
I think that years ago, it was more the case than it is now. I think it is definitely more common knowledge, but I also think that we don't need to even bring up climate change when dealing with the issues that these cities are taking care, are facing, whether it's plastic pollution, drought, nutrients in their water, their drinking water supply. That doesn't have to be the focus. What has to be the focus is their local communities and the collaboration of everybody working together.
Yeah, Colin, I wanted to ask you about, at the last meeting, I think it was in Twin Cities, mayors came away with this idea that they should have a compact. I'm not sure what the term is, the Mississippi River Compact. And I know we could talk about this for half an hour, but what's the idea here? What would be different with the compact than, say, what the organization you have now?
The compact would legally protect the freshwater resource of the Mississippi River. We have that right now for the Great Lakes. We have since 2009. And we have something similar, a similar legal protection for the Chesapeake Bay as well, and the Hudson River Valley in upstate New York. They're looking at one in the Columbia River Basin in the Pacific Northwest. What it would do would protect our freshwater system from straws being put into it and taken for any use here, as well as out to a farther location.
That we take for granted that we have a water supply here.
Right, we do.
And
Yeah.
I imagine every city along the said, well, we've got water.
Yep,
Other people want that water.
other people want that water.
So here's my question. Is it really our water or is it the nation's water? Why should we, that is St. Louis and Vicksburg and Quad Cities and all of those other places, why should they say it's our water and it doesn't belong to places that need more water than we have?
The nation benefits from the Mississippi River as a working hydrological system that's ecologically healthy. If you start conveying large doses of water to other parts of the continent, you will compromise that dynamic. And the harm that we would get and the national security implications to both the U.S. and the planet would be much more expensive than if we keep that water here and part of a working ecology. And that's what the compact does. Moving massive amounts of water through an a transcontinental oil-style pipeline would devastate our working environmental systems of the Mississippi. We get much more out of it as a country if we keep that river whole.
Jennifer, in working with other cities and towns and other countries as well, I think that's the thing. We are learning from each other. We're learning from what other river towns and cities are doing in Europe and Asia, are we not?
Well, actually, we are leading that charge as far as an organization of river corridor-wide organization. And so a lot of other countries do look to MRCTI as being such a powerful voice for local communities and local governments, and this, especially the partnerships and the working across party lines that really benefits other people learning from us. But of course, we learn so much everywhere we go, especially when it comes to environmental issues and those types of things.
Well, thanks. I know it's steady work. Jennifer Wendt and Colin Wellenkamp from the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.